Okay, so before we can move on any further, I just want to quickly talk about some of the key differences between drawing men and women. Now, everything I say in this section you need to take with a grain of salt, because everybody has a different body type, and you'll see what I mean as I go through this. So the first difference obviously is that women have breasts and men do not. So what this looks like is, if we take let's grab a red, this part here of the breast, or where the breast is a fatty tissue, and underneath that is where we would have our chest muscles. Okay, so what that would look like from the side of our collarbone here, it's our shoulder muscle, and then we would have our fatty tissue that makes up our breast on top of that, like that. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. That's a pretty simple difference. I think most people would get straight off. So the next one I'm going to talk about is the trapezius, this muscle here. So the traps are generally, and I say generally, thinner this way on women. So this part is a bit thinner, and you see this part is a lot thicker. And I say generally because obviously all women have different body types. Some of them are more muscular, and in which case they'd have, bigger trapezius and whatnot. But I'm just talking in general terms, so keep that in mind. Okay, everything I say, obviously apart from the breasts, isn't necessarily a rule. It's just a generalization. Okay. All right. So trapezius is smaller on the females and larger on the males. The next thing that I quickly want to talk about while we're up on this section is the neck as well, because that connects. The neck is generally thinner on females than it is on males. Again, generally. So keep that in mind. If you're drawing the typical or atypical male and the typical female, that's what you would do. You'd have a much thicker neck on the male, thinner neck on the female. So moving on, the next thing is the hips and shoulders, or I should say hips, waist and shoulders. So with a man, you generally want the shoulders to be wider than the hips. So you can see if I draw a line down here, the hips are much thinner than the shoulders are. Okay, so this has to be wider than this. Okay, and you'd have the opposite on the hips. So this would be wider than this. Okay, again, that's just generalizing. Now I said hips, shoulders, and waist. Now with women, what we're looking for is a hip to waist ratio. So what I mean by that is this part in here is going to be thinner than this part here. Okay, so that's how we get that classic hourglass look to the body. So we want thin here, thick here. Okay, again, generally you can draw women that don't have that. Okay, and again, you could draw men that have that as well, depending on what the character is that you are drawing. Okay, so they're the main differences that I wanted to talk about. So hip to waist ratio, having a bit thicker trapezius and neck muscles on the male than the female, and the last thing that I really wanted to talk about was muscle mass. So, and again, this is a huge generalization, so it's not a rule. Generally speaking, muscle mass on men is a lot more bulky and it's a lot leaner on women. So you'll have, for example, let's draw a leg muscle of a guy here. So we have a nice muscly guy. Okay, and then on the female, what we'd want is we want a bit more subtle, or rather I should say a lot more subtle. Excuse the horrible legs here, but just to illustrate the point. So you can still see the muscles here and here, but it's, like I said, it's leaner and more subtle. And yeah, I could even chuck in a little indication here, which is still leaner and more subtle than this more defined muscle on the side there. Okay, it'd be the same if I was drawing an arm, say. And then on the female, I'd have the muscles a lot leaner. Still indicate them. You know, I've still got my tricep, still got my bicep, you know, still got my forearm muscles here, but they're a lot leaner. Okay, and this is obviously a very muscly man and a muscly woman. Now, this isn't to say that women can't have arms like this and men can't have arms like this. It's all dependent on like I said, on the character that you're drawing. So things to keep in mind. Hip to waist ratio is very important. Okay, the thickness of the neck and trapezius muscles, the wideness of the shoulders, and then the definition of the muscles. Okay, the leanness, I should say, of the muscles, bulkiness. Alright, so with that, we're going to finish this lesson up, and when we come back, we're going to start going over gesture drawing and actually start drawing some of these muscle groups in action.